we should read our Bibles.
As men digging for buried treasure.
When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of peoples according to the number of the sons of God.
In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth, for whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times.
Take no part in the fruitless deeds of darkness, but yet expose them.
Though 1,000 fall at your side, though 10,000 are dying around you, these evils will not touch you.
Life's a garden, man. You gotta dig it. Hello, fellow treasure hunters. Welcome to the excavation site. I'm Justin. Alongside me, we got Ben, Stephen, and Chad. We'll be your guides on this excursion. Hope you brought your shovel and your compass, because we got the map. Let's dig. What's going on, all my local guys and gals and long-distance pals? We're back.
We are. Feels like I just saw you yesterday.
I know, right? These 2 days.
These 2 days are killing me.
Ben, he's still feeling under the weather, so no Ben this time again.
No, but I am excited. I'm excited about today.
Yeah, speaking of long-distance pals, we got a really long-distance pal with us here today.
About as far as it goes.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and open up in prayer. And dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the many blessings that you've given us. We just pray that you give us discernment over your word, and we get some nuggets revealed to us today, Father, and it draws us closer to you, digging into your word. We thank you for our guest today, taking time out of his schedule to sit down with us and talk about these things. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, you want to introduce our guest, Steve?
I'm going to give you the honor. I had the honor last night.
Oh, it's my turn?
It's your turn.
Well, ladies, brace yourself, because not only do you got the southern drawl, you're going to have a man from the land down under today. So just lay back and relax and enjoy the smooth, mellow tones. We got Tim Steadman from Australia with us. How you doing, Tim?
Well, g'day, mates. It's great to be meeting with all you guys, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to this.
Oh yeah. For you that don't know, Tim wrote the book Answers to Giant Questions. He's also got a podcast with the same title, Answers to Giant Questions. Man wrote an amazing book that I tore through in no time. I couldn't put it down. So we had to get our schedules together. That way we could sit down and talk about this. But I've been looking forward to this for a long time. For those that's a member of our Facebook community, Tim's on there. You've probably seen him and maybe said hey or seen him in some conversations on the forum. Tim's also got a forum, Answers to Giant Questions. Get on there. They're digging into a lot of good stuff on there too. But I guess to start off, the obvious question, the title, Answers to Giant Questions. What inspired you to write this type of book and this subject matter? And, why is it, in your opinion, important to understanding the Nephilim enlarging the faith?
Good question. Yeah, so I think I was frustrated with the lack of accessible resources on this topic. It started out with an occasion where I was preaching to a local congregation, friends and family and that, and I was talking about the obedience of Noah, the great flood, and that whole story, and I just wanted to bring something out about Noah's character. But you can't talk about the flood without the rationale behind the flood and the effects of it and all that, and coming to terms with a God who is prepared to wipe out every living thing. You can't just gloss over that. You have to talk about it. And in the understanding that I had at the time, I really felt that I had no option other than to say that, these people that perished in the flood must have just been really bad, and God couldn't save them. They had their chance and they said no. So God just killed them. Those words had hardly got out of my mouth, and I thought, you know what, that's just wrong. And I need to seriously search the scriptures and seek God on this, because I don't think that that's consistent with the character of God, the same God who forgives us of our sin. And, I believe in his goodness, and I believe in the integrity of his character. And I just thought, well, there's something I don't understand about this flood story then. It is really going to help me reconcile these two views of God, where on the one hand, he's I suppose the angry God, the God of vengeance, and on the other side, you have the God of love and forgiveness. And I thought, no, this is the same God, so I need to have a consistent view of Scripture. And I was sort of plowing through those early chapters of Genesis, looking for a clue, looking for some reason why I'd kind of missed something about what God was doing with the flood. And I hit that word Nephilim, and
it's like a little blurb in there, isn't it? You miss it if you ain't paying attention.
Yep. Just that one word, and all the translators just want to leave it alone. They translate everything else and just leave that there because they don't want to touch it. And, of course, the King James just comes out and says giants. Well, I saw that and I was like, now, come on. The King James is, oldie worldy kind of language. And I thought maybe they've just kind of misunderstood this or whatever. I don't know. It just seems really far-fetched. I, didn't have that fully formed supernatural worldview that we've all come to know and love in recent times.
Well, it was just never talked about, you know what I mean? It was like an alien to us the first time we heard it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had to do a lot of digging to get anywhere with someone who would actually provide a detailed study and show their findings on what that word actually meant. And that's how I come across Dr. Michael Heiser and all his work. And so things really snowballed from there. And I started doing so much research and writing so many notes. And after about 10 years of doing research and writing notes, I thought, I should probably just write a book.
Heiser was kind of the thing that started snowballing us as well. Just the unseen realm and things of that nature are just, it blew my mind. And it's something that it's like listening to a broken record, because everybody who's read it said, I'm reading the Bible with a whole new set of glasses on. I'm seeing things in a whole different light, and everything's starting to make sense that before you would just gloss over. Because there's certain things like you talked about. Why would God kill every living thing on earth? Or later on when we get to the land of Canaan, why would he say to kill every man, woman, child, and animal? Don't bring anything back. I mean, it seems so inhumane. It doesn't seem like a loving God would do that. However, if you know the story and you understand the reasons, it makes sense. But if you don't, it seems like, oh God, slow it down a little bit. But in all honesty, I think that, looking at your book and reading through your book, it's such a good kind of definitive way of looking at kind of all the different aspects. And you went right through and kind of showed right from the beginning, when we talk about the part of Genesis, all the way through, showing the Amorites, the Amalekites, talking about everything through Canaan and going all the way through to, even more nowadays. So, and that's something we'll talk about here in a little bit. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I just think that I'd definitely recommend it to anybody who's especially getting into this and really trying to understand where all this came from and why when we read our Bible, some things don't make sense. And I think that's kind of what you had said, I think, in the early part of the book was this is crucial to our faith. This is crucial to help strengthen our faith, to understand God, to understand why things happen.
Yeah, that's right. I don't want to give the impression that, if you don't understand the giants, then you don't understand, the whole Bible or the world or whatever. You've got some people who will say that understanding that is the only way to really know anything about the Bible, and you're not really a true member of God's church if you don't understand all these things, because God meets us where we are. All this stuff just really helps to make it all coherent, but I would never claim that this kind of understanding is like the gateway to the true faith or something like that. I get that from some commentators. There's some guys on YouTube who are just kind of like, well, if you don't believe in giants, then you're not even a Christian, that sort of thing.
Oh, no. That's not where we're going with that at all.
And my thing, honestly, like with me, and I know, like you said, God meets you where you are. I like that. Everybody, has got a love language, or a learn language. Some people learn better by observing. Some people learn better by getting their hands on it. And God is the one that created you. He knows how to talk to you, how to get to you, and how your mind works. And like me personally, understanding all these stories and connecting the dots, I've said it time and time again on the show, it draws me closer to God. It makes me have a better appreciation for God. And I've used this, example. It's like, the stories of the Bible and the faith. It's a mosaic. You have all these little small pieces in. When you're just looking at the piece, you don't know what it is. But when you start putting them together and you stand back, you can make out what it is. And all these right here, the giants and the second temple, worldview, the supernatural, all these little things are little small puzzle pieces. You don't need them, and you can see the whole picture. But if you actually collect those pieces and put them in, you might see a little something in that painting that you never noticed before, and you're like, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. It just illuminates the whole thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it helps us to appreciate the Bible as an intelligent work of literature. When you see what people are doing within the text, and once you get to appreciate the mastery of it, it's just amazing. The more I study the Bible, the more I love it.
100%. I think that, and that's a lot of what, we always try to focus and always make sure that we start with everything from a scriptural base, but we definitely still use the references. And I think that you said that really well at one point. You said only scripture will be treated as authoritative. Anything else is reference and context. And you said that specifically. It's a line out of your book, which I think that's so important. But the thing is, I like looking at, when we use, First Enoch a lot, or we use Jubilees, or we use Jasher, or some of these other apocryphal books, all these different pieces of ancient or historic literature, they just lend to the Bible. They continue to prove the Bible's true. They help strengthen that. And a lot of it, when we go in through and you think about the whole section of the giants, when we're talking about the base story of the giants, 8 verses, in Genesis 6, and then if you can go past that and obviously see it in so many different parts of the Bible, but it's skipped over when we don't talk about it a lot. But I think it's so important when we look at kind of how everything trended towards the flood and seeing that. And I think that that's where things like Enoch and Jubilees really come in and help strengthen that picture. Because I believe at that time, all those pieces of literature were common knowledge to the people of the time. So the Bible didn't have to elaborate because everybody at the time knew, well, there was giants. So
in the oral tradition, this was something well known to the people.
Everybody knew this. They didn't have to rehash it. It would have been like beating a dead horse. It just didn't make sense. So and then when we also see those same books, with Jude and Peter, referencing, first Enoch, throughout the Bible, it just helps kind of strengthen that connection. But going in a little bit to what you kind of brought about in your book, and some really interesting, good points that I really like, was I first want to kind of look at the bloodline of Cain and kind of see where the giants fell in. Because I used to jump right into the Bible. Okay, we listen to creation. Now I'm going to go right to Genesis 6 because I think it's cool. And I'd skip that Genesis 4 section there. Lamech, all of a sudden he's got 2 wives. He's kind of trying to break every covenant God had in place at that time. I'd like you to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's something I'm getting deep into at the moment on my own show, actually, on the Answers to Giant Questions podcast. And I don't mind spoiling a little bit what's coming up in this season. But I've spent the last couple of months diving extra deep into Genesis 4 for that reason, like trying to help listeners to the show understand the foundational nature of that text, the whole primeval history, those first 11 chapters of Genesis. I believe those are there to provide the interpretive framework for the rest of the Bible. That basically helps you to see the bigger picture throughout the biblical narrative, just repeated in bigger cycles, right? So we start small, we start with little stories. So as far as Cain and Abel is concerned, we've got a man and his brother. We see them coming before God in a time of hardship. They were keeping flocks, they were working the ground, and this is just lost in our English translations. Those days came to an end, and they were looking to God for his favor to sustain them. They're looking for a good season next year, that kind of thing. So they bring offerings, right? That's the pattern of life in the ancient Near East. So they bring offerings, and it's the faithfulness of Abel in his heart that God acknowledges, and you see the author of Hebrews expands on that and talks about Abel's faithfulness. And Cain, on the other hand, he's kind of just going through the motions, and I did the thing, so I expect the result, that kind of attitude. And that sort of shows in an in-depth exploration of the text. You can really pull this apart. We haven't got time for that, but certainly if you want to check out some of the recent episodes of the podcast, I go into some depth, just exploring the symbolism and the significance of the particular words chosen to tell this story. Yeah, we see that Cain's offering was not looked upon favorably by God, so he gets upset. And
to put it mildly,
the text kind of gives us the impression that this was like an immediate thing, like it just happened all on the same day. Like they bring offerings, God doesn't like Cain's offering, Cain gets upset, Cain goes kills his brother. But this is a much longer story. I think we're talking about months, if not years here, where Cain is struggling to survive without the favor of God on him because he hasn't been faithful, he hasn't been relational toward God, right? Abel, on the other hand, in his faithfulness, he's prospering. And so, Cain starts to get pretty angry about this, and he realizes that he's not getting anywhere with God, so he's got to find some other way to sustain his crops and the people that depend on him. We have this tendency to read scripture as though there's only 4 people alive in the world at this point. And I don't think that the scripture actually supports that. Cain worries about who's going to find him and kill him after his murder day. Is he worried about mum and dad? Like, I think there's more people out there, and they're just not central to the story, so they don't get mentioned, But yeah, this idea that Cain has to find some other God who's going to bless him to sustain him and his way of life. This really touches on the heart of Israel during the period of the judges and the kings, right? You've got this constant lapse into idolatry and seeking other gods, not trusting Yahweh, looking elsewhere to get what they need. And you see this epitomized in Cain, right? So when we look at the nature of what happens in the murder of Abel, we find that this is like a ritual killing that is enacted, and there's certain ritual language in the text which is kind of obscured again in the English translation. It's just so hard to capture all of that meaning in English because we have such a wide vocabulary and it doesn't have all the nuance that you get in Hebrew. That the Hebrew language is so small, a lot of the words do double duty and they mean more than one thing. And when you listen to it spoken, you get all those connotations. We tend to rely on reading an English translation, which has very specific definitions that don't capture it all. So a lot of this is lost on us. We don't realize what's going on. It looks like a violent murder, and it is, but there's a ritual context here. And the authors of the New Testament pick up on this. You see it in the words of Jesus, in Jude and Peter, and the author of Hebrews. Matthew records it in his gospel. You have all this connection to this religious aspect of the murder of Abel. So we're talking about a human sacrifice here. Wow. And the idea was that this was a ritual enactment of what Cain wanted on his land, right? He wanted life and fertility restored on his land. And as you all know, and I've heard you talk about it before on your show, blood represents life. And we have a tendency in our modern situation, we think about blood as something negative, like it's the loss of life, it's death, it's destruction. But the flip side of that is that blood is essential to life and therefore it represents life. So the idea of a ritual sacrifice was to shed blood because you wanted the God to bring life on the land. Now, of course, this wasn't directed toward Yahweh, right? We're talking about a different God here because Cain's already demonstrated that he's unfaithful to Yahweh. So when we think about it, where are we going to find a God of weather? Because he needs rain, right? This is the reason for the bloodshed. Like, it's symbolically wetting the ground with something that gives life, okay? And a God of fertility, right? Because he needs good crops and all that kind of thing, right? In the ancient world, particularly in a world dominated by Amorite culture, which you find all through Canaan and also Babylon, and I believe that this is written in the context of the exile, or maybe post-exile. The god in question is probably Baal, who we know from the New Testament is roughly equated with Satan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about some pretty deep connections back to satanic ritual sacrifice. And this was the kind of stuff that people were doing in the pre-exilic period in Israel's history, right? They're looking for someone to bless their land. They weren't prepared to be faithful to Yahweh and live in his blessings. They wanted something else. They wanted immediate gratification. They felt that they couldn't trust God if they had to wait it out and be patient and develop a godly character. They just want it now. They want gratification. They're greedy. And
sounds like this generation.
Yeah, very much.
See, I love how your mind works, Tim. That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
I think that shows too that when you talk about we've said this before, and I think Derek Gilbert brings it up a couple times too, is that, you look back through history and it was, prior to Jesus, it was always a sacrifice. It's a blood sacrifice to atone for your sins. And the devil always just turns things around, and and he wants to be he wants to be revered as God. He wants to be God. So you would have these, like you said, that's a ritual sacrifice. Blood is always the key. You know what I mean? That's always what's used. And in the end, it's the blood of Jesus. You look at the very first sacrifice, that was That was when God gave them animal skins when they left the garden. That's the first sacrifice that happened. He animal gave its life so that they could have clothing. God did that for them. There's so many different ways that you see, and we've talked about this a ton of times, and like you had even said, blood's the key. Blood's always been the key, and I think we talk about those. We've talked about that numerous times recently about the Ove of Endor and what that meant. The ritual pits and the blood sacrifices to call on their familiar spirits, but also you look on God's side. It was always a sheep without blemish or a ram without blemish was the blood sacrifice. It all comes back to the blood, and I think that that's really important as we talk about going down further down the line about some of the bloodlines too, right? As we go down through and we start looking at with Lamech and potentially the first family that may have been interacting with the fallen angels when they came down. And I think you kind of went into that a little bit in your book here. And and I'd like you to elaborate on that a little bit, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So it's not made explicit in Genesis, of course. It's really picked up on in the Enochic literature in the Second Temple period. But you see traces of it as you go back. And you've got to remember that the people who are writing all this stuff in the Second Temple period, they are drawing inspiration from Scripture directly, right? So you can trace all of this back from the Genesis account if you know how to read it and how to listen to it, and that's the real challenge, because as I say, you pick up an English Bible and it's really hard to find. But what you see as Genesis 4 progresses and we have the descendants of Cain, and I've talked in great depth on my podcast about how I don't get into the serpent seed doctrine and that kind of thing. I don't believe that these people are the offspring of the devil or anything like that. They don't need to be, honestly. Like, we're all capable of evil, right? And what we're seeing in the line of Cain is people who have just lost their way, right? I mean, Cain goes into the land of wandering, and he's now living this meaningless, purposeless existence. He's effectively become iconic of decreation, uncreation, right? He's, his descendants all sort of represent what happens when you go away from the good order and purpose that God brings to our lives, and you see this constant desire for more. It's not enough to have one wife, you've got to have two. It's not enough to live on the land, you've got to develop technologies and amusements and all this. And what we see in Lamech's family is the origins of civilization. And we've got things like metalworking and music and trading and commerce and that sort of thing. That idea of those who live in tents. We're talking about people who move from place to place and trade things and all that. So what we're seeing there is all these things that people use to support themselves when they're not faithful to God, relying on Him. Jesus said the birds don't worry about what they're going to wear and what they're going to eat, and the flowers look beautiful without any clothes and all that kind of thing. The world that God had wanted for us was one where we would be faithful to Him and trust Him to provide for all our needs. And what we see in Lamech is this desire to build artificial structures, cities and civilization and tools and all these things to try and become self-sufficient and to be your own God. But then there's something missing still, because you realize that there are other people around, and you need to have power over them if you're going to get your way. And this is where a connection to the divine becomes desirable, because if you want to exercise power over others, then you need to have something that they don't. You need to have some power or some authority. And of course, it's not an atheist kind of world out there. Like, it's very much in touch with the divine, and people are aware of the gods. So it becomes a natural progression then for Lamech and his family to desire contact with the gods, to give them some kind of authority over the civilization that they've created. This leads them then to start interacting with foreign gods, who we would know as the sons of God, introduced to the story in Genesis 6. What's not explicit in the text is that these sons of God appear to have been at work for quite some time in the background of the Genesis story, and it's only when we get into the context of the flood that they're actually named as such, and given a share of the responsibility for what happens in the flood story.
So do you think that it was just something that they just kind of eased their way into, and then they just got so, I don't know, flamboyantly obnoxious toward the end? They thought they were untouchable, and they were just running wild, and that's when God had to slap them with the hammer, so to speak? That they thought they were just the rulers of this world, and nothing was going to get in their way or stop them?
Yeah, I think that all sin and corruption starts on a small scale and becomes bigger. You know, in your own life and in my own experience, you know, sin begins with entertaining a thought, doesn't it? And then it's kind of dwelling on it and acting on it, and before long it becomes a way of life if you're not careful. And I think that the situation that we have in the ancient world, and according to my reading of the Garden of Eden story, again, we haven't got the time to break that down in great depth, but I view the Garden of Eden story as one in which the divine council is present in the garden, and they are represented by the trees. Right, so God says to the man, you know, you can eat from the trees, right? You can learn from them. You can take in what they have to share with you, except for this one, because you know this is the one that'll kill you. So these members of the divine council had a purpose to edify and to build up the man and his wife, and to provide instruction and guidance. And over time, they start seeing the civilization that man has built for himself, and they start seeing the unique status and privileges that God has given humankind. And they start thinking, you know what? I'd like to try that out for myself. And on the other hand, you've got the humans in rebellion against God, thinking, yeah, you know what? I could use some divine power. You know, I wish I was a glorious being like these angels or these sons of God, you know. So I think that on both sides there is sufficient motivation. So you can understand how these things happen. This is just corruption that sets in when desire meets an opportunity. And yeah, from there the whole thing plays out, and you have a situation where Lamech is looking for something that's going to establish his family with a legacy and make them prosperous and secure. And so, you know, he's looking for power, for authority, for prestige. He wants to be feared. He wants to be respected. And the sons of God want to have that human experience and to know what it's like to be, God's favorite thing. So
it's kind of like
yeah,
a betrothal thing going on. It was
yeah.
what do they
It
call
seems like
that?
there was
The
some kind of
bride
arrangement.
price.
Mm,
Yeah, Lamech was like, well, yeah, you can have my daughter. You give me the knowledge and the power, and then I'll give you
Like the
the
dowry.
beautiful woman. Yeah, dowry.
The
That's the word I
dowry.
was looking for.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I think that's exactly what was going on. I think.
yeah, I also want to touch on this because it was one of the first things in your book that stood out to me. You just mentioned the garden. You know, uh, God made us. It says that He made us in His image. Uh, we're supposed to be the representation of God on earth. And you said in the book, Adam was more than a gardener. It was about stewardship. And you mentioned Kings Park and Queen's Garden in Australia. And I don't know if it's like that here, and I've just not noticed it, or if it's just something unique that your all's parks have. But I loved how you drew the analogy, uh, which I mean you're from there, you could probably explain it better than I could. But how there's different sections and plants to represent uh, the totality of the country, I guess, so to speak, and how that is basically a good parallel for
Mm.
Eden.
Yeah, yeah. So because Australia is a Commonwealth country, um, of course you have the head of the Commonwealth in England, and uh, wherever they went and colonized, they wanted to maintain a cultural connection and an awareness of that authority and headship of the monarchy. So, you could go to Canada or anywhere else in the Commonwealth for a time. That would include places like Hong Kong, um, and all over the world wherever the Commonwealth was established. You would find these connections, and it's done in this symbolic way, representative of that. So I can go to these parks that I talked about, Kings Park or whatever, and see planted there uh, trees from all over the world, which are placed there to be a reminder of our connections and dependence on what used to be the British Empire. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore uh, in that form. It's become kind of archaic and um, not something we do anymore. It's not politically correct. But that's just following on the back of a tradition that has existed for thousands of years. So in the ancient Near East, they had a similar thing. You had the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, that kind of thing, right? So the idea was they would go uh, conquer some place, or perhaps just have a favorable agreement or some kind of treaty with another nation, and they'd bring back plants and put them in the king's garden. And the king then has this role as a gardener, where he tends to that garden, and this is representative of his authority over that place and how he cares for them and provides for them, right? So um, that was designed so that people who are from those places would understand that this guy's got their best interests at heart, and they need to cooperate with him so they don't get neglected. So yeah, it was an interesting little analogy, because when you look at Eden and in that divine council setting, you see that it's representative of the world. So we could imagine that Eden was the kind of place that if you actually had a physical garden with trees in it, they would be trees from all over the world, as representations of that idea.
Yeah, see, I'd never thought of that when I read
That's
that. I was like, that is really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
A lot of symbolism and stuff there.
Oh yeah.
You got another one?
Oh, I got a ton.
You got your notebook over there.
I got a ton.
I don't want to hog him.
I love this. First of all, and I say this all the time, but the giants and the Nephilim in general are kind of my favorite topic when we talk about anything biblical. It just kind of it opens that world of fantasy a little bit, and you hear, there's, you think about stories and myths that we hear, Jack and the beanstalk, you hear these stories, these mythological stories that have been passed down, and usually there's a little bit of truth to any myth. There's a seed there that caused those things, but kind of going, we've hit the flood, right? The flood happens because the bloodline's been corrupted, right, by the fallen angels, and we kind of see that as that kind of progresses. But post flood, right? This is always the $1 million question. We ask this to multiple people,
and he actually addresses it.
Yep, but that's why I'm bringing that up. But post flood,
that was awesome.
I want to kind of know your idea of how this carried on, why we see the Amalekites, the Amorites, the different, the Canaanite tribes and stuff. I kind of want to hear, your take on those things.
Yeah. Okay. So, having gone through and looked at other alternatives and seeing the premises on which those are built, I sort of pulled down a few worldview issues that kind of rule out some of the alternatives, right? You've got people saying, oh, well, they must have survived the flood, or, there were giants living in caves because the earth is hollow or something like that, or, Noah's wife was a giant or something like that. I go through all these alternatives and show from the text that they just don't work, right? Which, of course, leaves the question of, well, how does it work, right? For me, this comes down to the guy that the Bible calls Nimrod. If you don't mind, I'll just read a few verses quickly from Genesis 10, verses 6 to 12. The sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. And Cush begat Nimrod. I'm just sort of shortening this a little bit. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Ashur and builded Nineveh and the city Rehoboth and Calah and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. The same is a great city. Now, there's so much to unpack there. But focusing on Nimrod, it says that he began to be a mighty one in the earth. And the real question is, how do you begin to be a mighty one? But specifically in the Hebrew, it's a gibor. We were introduced to that term for the first time in Genesis 6, and it doesn't appear again until we're talking about Nimrod. So there's a very deliberate connection that the author is making between the Nephilim and Nimrod. So that's the first thing we need to pick up on. And he's actually called a Gibor like 3 times in this text. So we need to understand that this is a real intensification. It's not just a case of, he was kind of like those guys, right? He's trying to be like one of them.
And that Hebrew word, was it shalal or?
Halal.
Yes.
Yeah, so that word translated as began, halal, it's an interesting term. There are actually 2 words using the same spelling, right? So one is began and the other is defiled. Now, in a normal grammatical construction, you can only put one of those in your sentence unless you're going to repeat it to intensify it or whatever. But it makes sense to translate as began. He began to be a mighty one. But remembering that the audience of this text, they're not sitting down reading books like us. We have that luxury. But in the ancient world, you went to the temple, you sat down, and you listened to somebody read this out aloud. And you had to pay attention because you were going to hear it once, and then you'd have to go home and think about it for the rest of the year before you came back and heard it again. So the idea of using particular words, because there are other ways to say began, right? You use that particular word because you know that there's another way to understand that word. So when you meditate on this word, you start to realize that this is a negative connotation toward Nimrod. Like, he's a bad dude and he's doing stuff that isn't good, right? And we're talking about a context of ritual or sexual defilement. So this is nasty stuff. Whatever he's involved in, it's bad. And the connotation of, in that sense of beginning, really breaks down to the idea of driving a wedge into something to start piercing. Like, think about snake fangs and how they're pointy, right? And they drive into the flesh. They make the hole bigger as they drive in, and then they inject the venom, right? Or if you're going to break a hole in a rock or something, you use a wedge to drive into that rock. And what starts as a little crack becomes a big split, right? So this idea of the beginning of this thing, started out small and became poisonous, if you like, and resulted in a total corruption. And I realize this is kind of vague because I haven't put it in specific context, but I believe that we're talking about some kind of ritual, probably involving bloodshed, and we've talked about blood, in order to give himself this kind of divine power, right? So he's finding some way to connect with the old gods of the pre-flood world, right? Because they're not dead, right? The mortal people of the pre-flood world were gone, but the divine powers, they're still out there. They're still active.
And is that what you think the Tower of Babel was all about? Like, basically, like what some people call a star gate, trying to draw them out, the old gods?
Yeah. There's definitely this idea that this was about connecting with the divine in the setting of an artificial mountain. They've constructed this mountain which represents the divine abode. But we have a tendency to think about these things in three-dimensional space-time, and we have sort of science fiction ideas about how this all works. While I appreciate the understanding of something like, a Stargate or a portal or something like that we talk about in our sort of science fiction sort of frame of reference, and I don't disagree. I think that for an ancient person, they don't have that worldview. They're sort of thinking about this as this invisible world, that isn't in some other place. It's right there with them, and it's a question of whether it's experienced or not. So you go through these symbolic gestures of, building a mountain and doing the rituals and stuff, but you're not trying to interact with a different time or place. It's really just signaling intention. Everything's about intent, and going through these rituals that they do, and you still see these things today. Actually, I talked in one episode of the podcast last year about a phenomenon that was big on YouTube for a while called blood over intent. I don't know if you guys heard about that. It was pretty crazy. So you had people writing out a statement of intent, something that they wanted. They're sort of putting this out there into the world. They obviously had some awareness that they're talking to supernatural powers, and they write out what they want and their intention, specifically with the words to bring forth heaven on earth, among other things that they wrote. And then they would shed their own blood on that document as a means of showing their, the sincerity of that intent, right? This became a pretty widespread thing on YouTube for a while. And it was connected back to this guy who was in this satanic cult and was trying to develop a following for himself and all that kind of thing. Right? So, I mean, it still happens now. Right? So back in the ancient world, you got people doing that kind of thing. They're trying to connect with the divine. They want that divine power for themselves. They're inviting these spirits, either the deceased Nephilim or the sons of God themselves, to come and empower them and give them that divine wisdom and glory that they've heard about from the pre-flood world. So I think that's what Nimrod had instigated, and he was trying to get a bit of a following, because he had the known world at the time under his control. And this is how we end up in a situation where the gods of the nations, those 70 sons of God that you hear talked about, that's a symbolic number, so we don't need to necessarily try and count them and correlate them to countries that we know
totality.
Today. Yeah, well, you've got the 7, which is the divine number, and 10, which is the human number of perfection. So you combine them, 7 times 10, you get your 70. So the idea is it's a combination of human and divine totality, right? So
and then you even got the split on that too with Lamech. His revenge was
right.
It was 70 times 7, and then also when Jesus said you are to forgive 70 times 70. So I mean that's kind of like a dualism, upside down inversion.
Yep, that's exactly right, and that's precisely what Jesus was doing, alluding back to that story for that reason. Yeah, so you see the setup then for what happens at Babel. You've got all these people trying to connect to the fallen sons of God, and God then intervenes and disperses them across the face of the world, which I believe is a judgment not just on humanity who thought that they could unite against God, but also on those fallen sons of God themselves. And basically as a way of saying, well, you think that you can be a better God over the people than I can? Well, let's see you do it. Right? Yeah. So they now got to prove themselves, and God knows that they're going to fall victim to their own corruption, and they're going to be subject to judgment.
Yeah. And one thing I always found a correlation with Tower of Babel was the god Enki. He was the god of the abyss, the Abuso. He's always depicted, with these wavy lines around him, the water. And he's always drawn with all these, fish around him. And you talked about it in your book, when the flood came, it was a complete annihilation. And I can't remember the Hebrew word, but it was for substance. And it meant everything that stands. And you said, well, there was 2 exceptions to that. There was fish and there were spirits. Those were the only 2 things that made it through the flood. And what's crazy is with Enki, the story goes is that he mated with a drowned woman and created these 7 sages, which were the Apkallu. And how are they depicted? They're half man, half fish,
basically
right.
just swimming their way through the flood, popping up and handing out knowledge to mankind.
That's right.
I mean, it's the same story, just retold, painting them as the heroes.
Yeah.
And that's what I
Yeah, that's exactly.
love digging into this stuff is like you find all these correlations everywhere if you know what to look for.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, we have this imagery of these, uh, these fish gods, if you like, turning up in the days of Nimrod. When you look in the Babylonian material, you have these various stories of this guy. He wasn't known as Nimrod to the Babylonians. He was called Enmerkar.
Mm-hmm.
And you have various stories of him uh, descending into some cave somewhere, disturbing an old tomb. And unfortunately, we have missing portions of the text there, but when the story resumes, he's terrified and trying to get out of there because he's uncovered some ancient evil and is trying to take over. And then following that, we have this condemnation of him as someone who had unleashed these malevolent spirits upon the earth. So Enmerkar went from someone who was revered and feared as a great king to someone who was disgraced, and they didn't want to talk about him anymore. So it's very interesting how the tides turned for him, and he'd done something that couldn't be undone. Couldn't put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak.
Going a little further forward here, and I know I'm sure Justin's got a couple more things, but this to me is one of the things that I kind of want to see your perspective on. And we just talked about the literal days of Noah, but when we talk about in the prophetic sense, as in end times, it'll be like the days of Noah. What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to see a resurgence of just evil? Does that mean we're going to see a return of that golden age, where the angelic beings walked among people, as they, we saw those fallen angels represent themselves as gods to the different nations. I mean, what does that mean, from your research?
What I think we're seeing worldwide in these days is the desire, under the guise of political correctness, to honor the gods of the ancient cultures around the world. And I find that very interesting when we consider the biblical worldview, and we look at that with those eyes. You can see that society on a global scale is heading toward the worship of these old gods. And this is one of the reasons why I think that we need to really make sure that the biblical worldview is talked about openly and uncovered for all to see. And, we dispense with that kind of naturalist worldview that has prevailed for the last few hundred years. So the church is equipped to deal with this because we're seeing the resurgence of paganism and idolatry, and most of us would just consider that foolish. It's like Halloween dress ups or something. Like you don't take it seriously. But I think there are people taking it seriously, and we as a church, I think, risk getting caught out. Caught sleeping, so to speak. We don't see this coming, right? And as far as what I think the future looks like, are we going to see giants and that kind of thing? I'm not prepared to come out and say emphatically, oh, it's going to look like this or that, right? The nature of prophecy is such that you really only recognize things in retrospect, to be honest. But certainly we we are trending toward a society that wants to be bigger, stronger, more powerful. We're eating more than we've ever eaten. People are getting taller and taller, actually, over subsequent generations. Ancient Israelites were like 5'3". Now I'm about 5'8" myself, and a lot of the time I look around and I'm by no means the tallest guy in the room. You know what I mean? Like, it seems to me people are getting taller. We have this tendency now to entertain religions and religious worldviews that haven't been seen for hundreds of years. So I think that the tendency toward the days of Noah may not come about in the way that we think, but when Jesus says that that's how it's going to be, he's got good reasons, right? He knows it's going to happen one way or another. Might not look the way that we think, but those days are coming, and we would be foolish to not read our scriptures carefully and consider the way that the world is going and not see it.
I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, at the same time that we live in a scary time, we live in an exciting time because we're that much closer to those end days when God will reveal His full plan. It's an exciting thing to think about, but at the same time, we look around us in our world today. You turn the news on, you turn anything on, and it's scary because exactly what you see. You talk about was Anana, right? As above, so below. You're seeing this come about in our culture today. I mean, the changes. That
and they've allowed Anana in the church now. Anana's allowed to, dress up and drag and read to your children now, and the church accepts this.
This is where it's slowly heading in that direction, and it's a scary time in that regard. But I think it's important. That's why one of the reasons that we started doing something like this, and I know that you're pushing forward with your podcast. Obviously your book is excellent. It's phenomenal information. It's so important that and as evil as technology can be at times, as amazing as it can be, that we can talk to you on the other side of the world right now, that we're able to reach people in ways we've never been able to reach them before, to spread that news, continue on we always say it, the Great Commission, keep spreading the word. And I think right now more than ever, with what you're talking about and how things are changing in our world, you're seeing a big push away from things like the theory of evolution and all this stuff. People understand there's something supernatural going on. And if the church doesn't accept that and start reaching out to those people and accepting that, if they just tell them, well, no, there's nothing supernatural, we're going to turn people away. We're going to turn people off. You're seeing those shows, and we've talked about this before, the Ancient Alien show, right? It's been on for over 20 seasons. People they know that this didn't happen by accident, but they don't want to have a responsibility to God. There's something supernatural going on, but we need to show them that the Bible shows all those answers.
And the thing was, that was the common knowledge. The sons of God, the giants, this whole supernatural worldview that today people consider, fringe Christianity, was the golden standard all the way up till the 4th or 5th century. It wasn't till mankind, we took it upon ourselves to protect the Word of God and protect the divinity of Christ. And that's what I love. Another thing about your book, you go in and highlight these early church fathers, and there's direct quotes in here. And it basically, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, but I mean, basically it was saying that if these sons of God in Genesis 6 remain sons of God, that it puts them on a pedestal equal to Jesus.
So therefore, the church fathers was going to protect the divinity of Jesus because he was the only true Son of God, and there's where the whole Sethite lie come into place.
Yeah, that's right. We need to remember that in the ancient world, and particularly in Hebrew idiom, to be a son of someone isn't by necessity some kind of a biological connection or something like that. We're talking about somebody who's of the same kind or a similar kind, right? And usually to a lesser extent. Okay, so when you have God the Father, the Creator, Yahweh Elohim, He is the pre-existent God above all gods, incomparable, and you know glorious in His majesty. I mean, you just can't talk about Yahweh without worshiping Him. But these other gods, they're created by Him, and they're like Him to an extent, but they will never compare, and they'll never be like Him. And that's what makes Jesus different, because He's not one of those. He is God.
Mm-hmm.
He is God. And, once that distinction is put in place, we should have a lot less problems with this worldview.
I know we're getting close to cutoff time. We've had you for a while. I don't want to keep you. But one thing is I never heard, with Leviathan. I've heard, the theories that, Leviathan, was, an actual, creature that, that it was a dragon or a dinosaur.
Yeah,
Then I've
crocodile or something.
yeah, then I've
Yeah.
heard theories, that no, it's just, uh, a representation of primordial chaos. There's all kinds of theories out there, and I thought that I'd heard them all. And then I read your book, and
Yeah.
I love the concept of this, and I just never thought of it. And it makes textual sense. You basically compare Leviathan to the Captain America series Hydra. That Leviathan is basically like a military entity. And could you just like elaborate on that a little bit in like your theory of Leviathan?
Yeah. So basically, what I'm saying is that Leviathan is the way that you talk about the embodiment, the totality of forces against God, right? So, on the one hand, we have God who is embodied through those who are faithful to Him, right? That's why we have terminology in the church, where we say that the church is the body of Christ, right? With the church as the body of Christ, we are those who put arms and legs to God. We act uh, as God in the world. Not that we compare ourselves to God, but basically our obedience to God and our allegiance to Him and our faith in Him help us to represent God in the world. And so we act um, on behalf of God to the world around us. That's the function of the church. And on the other hand, you have the Leviathan, representative of all those forces in opposition to God. So you see this in so many places. When we look at the book of Job, which of course mentions the Leviathan in some detail toward the end of the book, we've got to realize that Leviathan wasn't just mentioned there, so that God could show off about how great He was, or is, sorry. Leviathan is mentioned in the book of Job because God is saying, don't you see that all the stuff that happened to you back at the start of the book, that that is the workings of the forces that think they can beat me, right? When these armies of raiders came and stole everything and burned everything, and when your family died after a storm came and destroyed their house, and when you suffered plagues and pestilence and all this stuff, right? That wasn't just accidents and freak stuff going on, right? That's the Leviathan rearing his ugly head, right? In every one of those cases whether it's divine beings or people who are opposed to God and to those who are faithful to God, in all of that, this is the working of supernatural evil coming through on various fronts. Okay, it's the idea of chaos, and chaos doesn't just come and knock on the door and invite itself in. It surrounds you and attacks you on all fronts, on all sides, all at once. And to deal with it, the only way is to depend on God, because He's greater and He's more powerful and He's got it all under control. Right? None of this stuff happens unless God allows it to happen for a purpose that He has for us. So that to me is the overarching message of the book of Job. And you just see this come through again and again through the biblical narrative. And I just love the story of Jesus calming the sea. The disciples are all in the boat, and He tells the wind and the waves to stop. And that story is connected back to all this Leviathan imagery and stuff that we read in the Psalms as well, and in the prophets. I mean, it all comes together. And right after Jesus declares sovereignty over the sea, which in itself epitomizes chaos, right, and is symbolically demonstrated in the Leviathan, then they turn up on the shore and they meet this guy who we know as Legion, and he's full of demons and all this bad stuff is happening to him, and this guy's suffering terribly. And Jesus again shows mastery over these forces and takes pity on this man and heals him. And again, you just see this multiplicity of divine beings and what we think of as natural forces, like stuff like storms and that, that's not natural forces, man. Like, this is the ancient world. They're thinking like, this is God's at work doing all this stuff. And Jesus just shows that all of it is subject to His sovereignty. And we as the body of Christ now, like, we don't have the command over those entities, but we trust the one who does.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because as I was mentioning Leviathan, I don't know if you noticed, I just kept looking over here at Stephen and grinning. That's one of his favorite subjects. And he brought up something in a study that I'd never noticed before about it. He was like, have you ever noticed? He said, of all these creatures and stuff that God's listing off, he said He's always saying that I created. He said, did you ever notice? He said, Leviathan, it doesn't say whom I've created.
It does say Behemoth He created, and then it gets to Leviathan and it does not.
And I was like, I've never noticed that.
Yeah. And, you can find that back in Genesis 1 too.
I love that's. It's one of my favorite subjects, kind of glossing over that. And there's some, I have some of my own ideas and theories on that, but I think there's so much symbolism used with the Leviathan idea throughout the Bible when you talk about that, and especially when we get to Revelation and we're talking about, kind of some of the end times prophecy. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just, it's fascinating to me trying to, and it's funny because it's changed for me so much now. We were talking about this the other night. I said about 6 months ago, about the time we were starting this and kind of getting going with this is that all of a sudden I was hit with so much conviction. Like I was always brought up Christian, those types of things. You know, we'd learn about these things, but I've never had something hit me, and the conviction to look into these things, the excitement of reading the Bible, the excitement that it gives you to look into it, and all of a sudden when you really want to and you pray about it, it jumps off the page at you. God comes at you and he lets you know, he shows you, it's his word. We said that before. That's one of the greatest gifts that we could ever be given is to have, first of all, God's word that we're given to read. But the fact is that when we read that word, he talks to us. He gives that back to us. So it is, I don't know. We are truly blessed to have that. On top of the fact that, after Jesus, we got the Holy Spirit, which having God live inside of us is something truly, when you saw throughout the Exodus, we talk about those where they are going through and eventually ended up in, the promised land in Canaan. How many times they fell away, and I always that drove me nuts all the time. They fell away again. Like, it's been 5 minutes, guys. Come on. But if we don't believe the supernatural side of the Bible and understand that these other entities were able to do amazing things, and on top of the fact they didn't have the Holy Spirit living inside of them, God would come down and sit on the Ark of the Covenant, and the people had to go to the priests to be able to talk to God, to go back and forth. We've been given a gift where we can talk to him anytime. And it's just, it's just changed every way I look at things. It's changed how I read the Bible. It's changed so much. And then getting to talk to people like you, it's such a gift because we get to talk to other people that have surrounded themselves in the Word and just God spoke to you. God's told you these things. God has worked through you through your work too, to help reach people in other ways, to help people strengthen their faith. And like you said, you don't need to believe in giants to go to heaven. That's not the whole point. We're saved, through Christ alone. But after we're saved, what's the point? What, do we just stop there? No, we keep digging.
Yeah. Well, I've got married, so I don't have to take her out no more or tell her she's pretty. No, you want that relationship,
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a big factor in putting my book together because I started out, well, look, I just want to know what the deal is with these giants, if they're real or not or whatever. And I plowed through the entire Bible trying to find as much information as I could. And, over time, I found that there were some other resources. I'm not the only person, obviously, who's written books about these things. I found lots of people had written books about giants. And, they were just kind of a bit hard to find at first. And I got into academic material and all sorts of stuff as well, rather than just the popular books, which I also devoured. I got a shelf full of them. But what I found was really missing was that you just didn't have many people actually putting some application around that and saying, okay, well, now that you know this stuff as a Christian, like, what's it good for, right? And how does all this stuff actually benefit you as a believer and the world around you, right? And that's what motivated me to keep going and to write the book and finish it, and how it ended up being quite a large book because I'd written some 300 odd pages and went, well, yeah, this is just information that people could learn if they just read their Bible. So it ended up being a lot bigger because I wanted to be able to show people, hey, well, this affects how you live. This is the mindset that you need to bring into your life to see yourself as part of the body of Christ, part of the force pushing back the darkness, rebuking that Leviathan, loosening the grip of the evil powers at work in the world to set captives free, and people are captive wherever they find themselves outside of relationship with God. And they don't even realize that they're part of that chaos monster. They're part of that ancient understanding of the sea as this purposeless, uncontrollable, disordered mess. Like Jesus Christ brings so much life and purpose and structure and meaning into our life.
And
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't shortcut this book. And anybody that listens to this podcast and hear the way you articulate, and you go, you don't just go surface level, you go deep. You're a thinker, and I like that. And the way this man thinks and talks, that's how he writes.
Just so you know, he never says that kind of stuff about me.
I'm
You
spoiled.
you should be flattered.
I'm spoiled. I'm with you every day. I take you for granted, Stephen. I'm sorry.
You guys are great, and I love listening to your shows. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I've been listening to yours
that.
too, and that's what I'm saying. If you like what you're hearing, there's more of it on his podcast. And what's great is him and his friend, they're not as long-winded as me and Stephen. they get these down in bite-sized sections. They're usually like 35 minutes, ain't they?
Yeah,
And
around that.
they're great. They're really good.
Yeah, I started the podcast to kind of to allow me to kind of develop the worldview a bit for people, because one of the frustrations I had with the book, and as we just mentioned, it's a pretty big book, but there was just so much to unpack in terms of worldview to help people to understand, and particularly chapter 5 in the book, like, is a real crash course in ancient worldview. But it really just, it wasn't enough to do it justice. So I thought, well, what I need to do is develop a podcast where I can break this stuff down verse by verse and help you see the way that ancient people thought about stuff, right? Because that's going to inform the way you read the whole Bible. So that's what I did the podcast for, because, I could have sat all this stuff about giants on the shelf and just went, you know what, I'm going to write my first book about ancient worldview and how to understand Genesis 1 to 11. And honestly, that sounds like the most boring thing ever to most people. They would never pick up a book like that and just happily remain ignorant. I thought, well, no, we started.
You'll sneak his nuggets in on them.
Yeah. So, let's talk about giants. And then, once people are past all the superficial, like, oh, how big were they? And, oh, wow, what did they eat? What did they look like? And, all that kind of stuff. You get past all that, you get bored of it very quickly, and then it's like, well, how do I understand things the way that ancient people understood them? What would they see if they were looking at this? And so the podcast now gives me the space to be able to unpack that worldview for people. So I think that the podcast, while it was originally conceived to sort of supplement the book, I now see the book as a way of people getting interested in the kind of material that the podcast brings out. And it's enabled me to sort of create a vehicle by which I can help people to get a handle on how to read their Bible, the way that it would have been understood by its first audience.
That sounds about like Derek Gilbert. When we had him on, he was talking. He said, he said, me and Sharon, he said, started a podcast. He said, just to promote the books that we wrote. He said, and then one episode later, he said, we was like, okay, we've done told them to buy the books. Now what do we talk about? And he says, we never run out of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, that's right. I love their show. And I've spoken to Derek a couple of times. We get on great. And we're definitely in agreement. The Word of God is just an inexhaustible resource, and we just learn so much and grow so much all the time. And as you guys always say on your show, you got to dig it. You got to get in there, right?
Yeah.
There's so much to be found if you just take the time to look.
Yeah.
Well, one more time, do you want to let everybody know where you can find your book and your podcast and everything
and
like
website
that?
and all that stuff, where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything comes back to the website giantanswers.com. So you can go there and find the podcast, which you'll also find on all the major podcast platforms. And the podcast is part of the Raven Creek Social Club. It's a network of like-minded podcasters. We have a variety of shows on there. You can check those out at ravencreeksocialclub.com. The book is available on Amazon. You can get it in paperback and Kindle. Again, there's links on my website to take you directly there, or you can just look it up at Amazon.com. And that's about all I have. But yeah, you find it all at giantanswers.com, and you can find me on the socials and whatnot as well. I have an author page, which is just called TJ Steadman. I have the Answers to Giant Questions Facebook page as well, which is more oriented around the subject matter of the book. And there's also a discussion group there, which is oriented primarily around the podcast, but all this stuff you can get in there and talk about all that.
And you can find us on there. We're in that group.
And if you want to, you can get in our group and bother him there, because he's there too.
Yeah.
So ask questions away.
And that's one thing too.
Yeah,
On his website, he's got forums you can get on there. If you got a question that you want him to dive into and tear apart, send him your questions, and he'll address them on the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Q&A is one of the big things on the podcast, which is why I call it the show that tackles your questions about the biblical giants and all this stuff on the primeval history and that as well. So.
And what do you do to get people to send you the questions? Do you bribe them or threaten them? Because we've done that, and it's crickets.
Yeah, no, it can be hard to get people who are brave enough to venture a question. But I get involved in a lot of Facebook groups and forums here and there. I do get questions emailed in, and sometimes someone will just stop me, like at church or something, and ask me a question. So yeah, they come in from all over the place. But yeah, sometimes I just look in those larger groups when somebody says, some random question which they've just kind of aired to the community in general, and I say, hey, would you like me to do an in-depth treatment of that on my podcast? I will tackle that question for you. And they always come back and say, yeah, I'd love that. So that's another way that I get questions come in.
Well, awesome. Well, Tim, man, I really appreciate you taking your time and come and talk to us. Hopefully we can do this again in the future. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And you guys are great. Thank you so much for giving me a bit of time on your show.
We appreciate it.
Oh, yeah,
That's
definitely.
awesome.
Yeah, so guys, look him up, Facebook. Check out the podcast. Don't forget to get your copy of Answers to Giant Questions. You guys keep digging.
We thank you for listening to the Dig Bible Podcast. Questions, comments, or future episode ideas? We'd love to hear from you at the dig423@gmail.com. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to share, subscribe, and check out our Facebook group at the Dig Podcast. Remember, you can't lean on a shovel and pray for a hole. You gotta dig.